Are live. Yes. Everything should be working. And
Cool.
as I always do, please chat, let me know if audio is fucked. And, if not, we can start.
That's how I
Hello,
start all
hello.
my Zoom meetings. I start with that line. Please let me know if audio is fucked. That's how, yeah.
Indeed, indeed. Well, we are live, and then let's start. Audio is fine. People are saying that things are perfect, so let's
Good.
start this talking. I'm so excited. Well, I will make a little introduction and then let's go. So,
Sure.
welcome for another show on Terra dos Mundos. My name is Chaz, also known as Guilherme, and I will be your host for tonight. And today I have the pleasure of talking with Ryan Verniere. I'm sorry if I
Yeah.
butchered your name.
No, that's great. That's
Uh,
it.
the creator of the game Blackbirds, which we will talk about a lot today, hopefully. A game that I am very excited about and that is right currently on Kickstarter. So, Mr. Ryan, say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself and about your game.
I'm having stage fright. I don't know if I can. No, I'm just. So please excuse me, the gringo game designer. But I'm so happy you're interested in this product. Yeah, my name is Ryan Verniere. You said it perfectly. It's like tooth enamel. That's what we call like when you get veneers done. Um, yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I mean, thank you for being interested in the game, and I've been following your tweets, and it's just like that. Your community seems so passionate and cool, and I'm very aware of how Brazil and South America in general is like super interested in dark fantasy. So y'all have been part of the bigger discussion about Blackbirds and like a publishing strategy for a very long time. Actually, over a year ago, South America, specifically Brazil, was brought up multiple times because I know that there are fans down there that are super passionate when they get into stuff. Just because I've been making weird genre fantasy for a very long time, and I see the responses from Brazilian fans and greater, Latin America.
And that is great to hear. We indeed, when we like something, we tend to love it a lot. So,
Like
uh,
nobody else. I know. Yeah.
that's true. We have a very rich and large fantasy community. We like fantasy a lot, especially dark fantasy, which is a genre not that well served here. I should say. And
Really? That's wild to me. Oh
oh yeah,
wow. All right.
I should say the probably one of our biggest RPGs are is very light fantasy, very traditional fantasy. Let's say. So, but it's very. People are hungry for this kind of stuff. I think. I sure am. And when I first discovered Blackbirds, I think it was beginning of this year or early or
Yeah,
um,
how did that happen if you don't mind me asking? It's my show now. It's like tell me how you just got. No,
no,
I'm
it's
just
fine. It's fine.
well
We can talk. We can talk a little bit about that. Well, I followed Daniel G. Fox, I believe it's his name, for the Zoy
yeah,
Hazard.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Love his game. Just
Oh yeah, it's great.
just a little. And I followed him for a long time, and then I start seeing him tweeting about this interesting game with really ridiculously amazing art. And and then Dave Raposa, which is one of my favorite artists, started tweeting about that, and then a lot of people that I actually follow start to talking about the game and started talking about the game, and then I was hooked, and then I started following the Twitter account and seeing the monsters and the little I don't remember the name exactly, but the little kind of travel guides with the squire talking
Oh,
about
the meandering squire. Oh
yes,
yes, yes.
those were fantastic. And then I started following this, and very quickly it became one of my most expected games for this year or the next year. I say. So yeah, so thanks to Twitter and Zweihander, I think.
Wow, that's awesome. I'm sure Dave will be excited to hear that you love his art so much. He's a good buddy, and a real character. So we were very blessed to have him, um, not only do one cover but two covers for us. It's sort of he's extremely generous. So, but yeah, no, that's awesome that the social media sort of drips of content excited you. Do you want to be known as Mr. Martinez, by the way, or do you want me to butcher your first name? How do you want to do this? As
Uh,
a
well, you can count. uh, that's actually hard. You can count be my nickname if you want to, which is Chess. Or you,
Chaz or
yeah,
Zaz? Okay, Chaz. Okay,
Chess,
that'll make.
like the
Thank you.
game.
You are such a kind soul for giving this boy from New Jersey, Chaz, to call you by. So thank you.
Yeah, that should be, or Mr. Martinez or Martinez if you want.
Mr.
Uh,
Martinez works too.
yeah,
Yeah.
I suppose Guilherme is very hard for.
I can
It's kind of hard.
practice for next
Ah,
time.
there is no
Yeah.
need. There is no need. So let's talk about something that before we start talking about the game properly.
Sure.
One thing that I think is very clear is that some other works of art like Berserk is a Berserk has a very clear influence in your work. Uh,
Yes. Yes.
and I would like to talk a little bit about that. I mean, what are your influences for Blackbirds, including and beyond Berserk?
I mean, other than being covered in like berserk tattoos and
Oh, that's
but
good.
like,
That gets is amazing.
oh yeah, it's not done yet, but yeah, there's a big Nosferatu Zod up here, and but yeah, Berserk. It does start with Berserk, doesn't it? And we've been really clear about that for a couple of reasons. One, I have a lot. There are a lot of things I truly love as a creator. Like I love Studio Ghibli's work. Miyazaki-san has been an influence. Miyazaki-san from Software and Dark Souls has been an influence, and then of course,
Oh yeah. When I saw a mechanical rekindling, I got an inkling of that.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And we wanted to pay homage and sort of just like let people know what we were about with some of these Easter eggs. And then, I always dreamed of sort of, as a creator, you sort of dream of having other creators' approval or like a wink or a nod or a pat on the back. And Kentaro Miura was definitely someone that I was like, oh, maybe he'll see this, right? And then, of course, we got the heartbreaking news just a few months ago, and I was like devastated because it's not the end of the story or his passing that sort of obviously inspired us. I encountered Berserk for the first time in a comic book store called Forbidden Planet in Manhattan. I grew up in New Jersey, very close to Manhattan, like 8 miles. I don't know what that is in kilometers, but very close. And I remember I got the first issue of the Dark Horse collection when that originally came out, somewhere in the 90s, I want to say, and like it was like a bomb going off in my head with regards to imagination and the approach. It was, it's like it's this Japanese author doing European dark fantasy. It was so inspired and singular, and I had not seen it, and I had played a lifetime of Dungeons and Dragons and reading Lord of the Rings and watching Lord of the Rings and all of it, and this was just such a completely different tone, like a shrill violin coming up out of an orchestra pit, and you're like, when everyone else is silent, it was just, and it shook me for years, and planted this dark seed that would eventually grow into Blackbirds. Absolutely. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I encountered it, and that's the impact it certainly had on me.
Oh yeah, that absolutely answers the question. Yeah. Berserk is very well loved over here, and I also discovered it on a kind of a young age, and it has left um, a very big mark on me as well. And then, so when I see a game with clear influences on the works of Kentaro Miura, it's very exciting because I know things are good. They usually are when well done, and when they have that
Well,
kind of pedigree, let's say. Well,
Well, I mean, now we have to honor him. So the book is dedicated to Kentaro Miura officially. It will be, every edition of Blackbirds will be dedicated to him.
that's
Um,
amazing.
yeah,
Uh,
it's important.
very good. That's very cool. That's very cool. Well, let's start talking about the game actually,
Okay,
and I think we should start about this with the setting, and then we talk some mechanics, and then the whole uh, Kickstarter and stuff that should be fun. So the setting. Let's say I don't think that will be the case for many people, but let's say there is someone here who, for some reason, doesn't know what Blackbirds is. How would you
sure.
describe your setting for those people?
Um, I would describe it as like cosmic horror, like a skin of cosmic horror stitched over the period of history known as, during the Hundred Years' War. It's a very grounded and gritty fantasy set in sort of like a European analog. Not to say that the game is only about white people or European people for that matter, which of course Europe is composed of much more people, um, and it only begins there. And so it's a very gritty, grounded medieval fantasy. Unlike some of the other stuff you might see in the marketplace, that's more young adult, sort of sparkle rainbow pony stuff, which is great, and I totally approve of, and am into, right? The sort of levity, the fun, escapist stuff that exists already out there. But we want it to be something different and more cathartic. And so comparisons would be like, we wanted to be more like a Game of Thrones or a Joe Abercrombie book, like the First Law trilogy, or something in a world where it wasn't just filled with the supernatural constantly. Orcs aren't walking down the streets. Elves, although present, are maybe 1 in 100,000 people, and they're hidden by their glamour. So I would just see you, and I would have no idea you're an elf, unless maybe there was a mirror around or other things going
Interesting,
on. And so,
interesting.
so the world looks quite mundane. And in fact, the book starts. I think in the 16 pages we released for free on Drive Through RPG, um, there's a passage called "A Deceptively Mundane World." I think that's what I titled it. And
Yes.
the point being that at first glance, if you were a bird flying over the lands, the continent of Erebos, which is not the entirety of the world just being called the world. Erebos is not the world; it's just a continent and a series of kingdoms. Um, it would look quite mundane, and then you would get closer and closer and closer, and then you would start to see the smoke from wars, and you'd get closer still, and the refugees on the road, and you get closer still, and then sometimes you might catch something truly horrific out of the corner of your eye. And it's those moments of legendary or horrific horror that sort of spikes through the ordinary that I think is a recipe that's not used much these days, because everybody seems to be riding on a flying carpet and has 5 heads and is a cat person in other games. And so we're the opposite of that.
Very, very interesting. Um, Actually, I asked that because I found your descriptions of the word and the feeling of the word very precise and very useful, especially when you say that game is, I think it was an alchemical reduction of epic fantasy, green dark fantasy, and dark fantasy.
Yeah,
And that's a very, and then you proceed to explain on the text what that means, which is super useful. Reading that, I think I got a very functional idea of the word, of how to see, by which lens to see that word. And when I say that on my earlier video, but it reminds me a little bit in you're talking about Berserk, but it reminds me a little bit when the first appearance of Zod story, because to to that point there was no supernatural. Oh yeah, fantastic. That's actually a very beautiful Zod. And when he first appears, that's the first inkling you have that there is any
yeah.
supernatural in this world. And I think Blackbirds will have a kind of a similar thing, and that when you will be dealing most of the time with mundane stuff, and then suddenly a monster of old will appear, and that will be terrifying and exciting.
That's so. Wow. How much time do we have for this podcast? Because
We
there's
have time, man.
there's like a lot to talk about if we want to talk about them, so someone in the chat, I don't want to ignore chat, asked
Please.
Lovecraft meets the War of the Roses, and that's great. That's a really good way to sort of explain it to your friends or anybody. Um, Lovecraft is a major influence, and I acknowledge the problematic elements of his legacy. He lived around where I grew up. So like, when you become like a Lovecraft nerd and you live anywhere near Rhode Island, you sort of become a Lovecraft history buff, and then quickly you're like, oh shit, some of this stuff is really not okay, and
Oh
what's
yeah.
why, but yeah, still an inspiration, and in many ways. And then the War of the Roses, very interesting because that was the inspiration for Game of Thrones. That was the historic analog for Mr. Martin. Um, who also grew up in New Jersey, ironically, like
That-
within 4 miles of where I grew up. Yeah, he grew up in Bayonne, and yeah, it's finding that sort of analog. I think is really helpful. But then back to what you were saying, you know, uh, you know, it's rhythm and pace and setting
yes.
expectations are really important to a lot of forms of media. Now, you can do whatever you want with Blackbirds as a Fate Weaver or a member of a flock. You might be playing in a game where you are facing, the old horrors every day. Your game might look like Bloodborne, for goodness sakes. You know what I mean? It might look like it's very different than my expectations of or how I would run a game, and that's the beauty of role playing games. But I wanted to at least write the book with an intention about pacing. And that was a lesson I learned from, early on watching like Stanley Kubrick movies. And then it got reinforced by one of my mentors, this guy, Rainier Harrison, an Icelander, who founded this company, CCP, and they made this game EVE Online,
Oh
which is
yeah.
a pretty popular
I played it
piece. Yeah.
for a few years.
Oh, really? Okay. So I worked at CCP as
Oh
like my
wow.
first big industry job way back in the day. And Rainier, everything I learned about creative direction comes from Rainier for better or worse. And his whole idea about Eve was it all starts with this pace. He establishes this pace of what Eve will be like, and then eventually how that pace will sort of rise and change into the crescendo of huge sort of fleet battles. And Blackbirds is very much built in this way where I think it will be best enjoyed, where characters first become very intimate with the world and who they are, not really even knowing that they're touched by fate, and then teasing out that they may be different and why. And it's not just that the world is at war, but there's something much worse happening. And then coming to the realization of like, we might be able to, in some small way, like resist this horrible thing that is occurring. And how a Fate Weaver chooses to approach that pace is totally up to them. But the book is written from a point of view
Oh
that's
yeah.
specific.
I I think that's very interesting and very important to think about because although, as you said, and it's very interesting that RPGs can be played in any way, and the Fate Weaver, as you say, can run his game with his flock. I did not know that the party was called Flock, and I love it already. That his flock can play the game in any way, but the text and the design and the art and the systems they tell you something when you read on a game book. And as you said, it's pacing, it's design, it's ways in which the authors and the designers have intended for the game to be played. And I think um, it's very interesting that you have that in mind when we
No,
talk
I
about
mean
that
it's
stuff.
like see, you're so serious. I want to call you Mr. Martinez and not
Oh,
Chaz, but
well,
no, no.
I must say that a few things. First thing is I learn English in a very particular way, so I kind of talk more formally than I should, but I don't
I
know
think
any
it's
better.
great.
So
No, it's wonderful. I think no, it's you're doing such a great job as a host. I know we're sort of like breaking the fourth wall here, but like I was a podcaster for when they first launched on iTunes, like back in the early 2000s, and and we were terrible at it, my partner and I. We were like, it was like the worst garage band pretending to be the Ramones, like it's like that, but we were like, it was bad, and this is so good, so I just
Oh,
wanted
well,
to call that out.
thank you. And also, I would say that a lot of my friends say that I'm too serious. So-
No, no, it's great. It's really keeping me focused with my ADHD, like in control, so I appreciate it.
okay. Um, I forgot what we were talking
Well,
about.
we were
So,
talking about pace and
oh yeah, pacing
intention and
intention.
the flock, and that's a sort of, and then I babbled on a little bit about
Ah, that's good.
creative direction.
Oh yeah, creative direction. So you actually answered one of the questions that I had because when I one thing that was a um, question that I had is when it's clear that blackbirds are special. They are touched by fate. They are not normal people. But I do not know if it was a known quantity. I do not know if they were like witchers. When people saw one of them on the street, they would say, "Oh, that's a blackbird." And for what you have said, I think that's not the case. That they themselves will most of the time don't know they are touched by fate. Is that correct?
Every answer I'm going to give is going to be sort of a monkey's paw, right, with dual meaning. So there's more. So first of all, it is up to the Fate Weaver and the flock to determine if they know or if they don't know.
Okay,
And I think those are two versions of the game that can be played, and that was designed that way intentionally.
nice.
A Fate Weaver and a flock who are like, we do know that we're touched by fate. That opens this door to all these meta questions about when certain rules are implored and reality is almost bending to service these blackbirds in fights or what have you. What does it mean to be aware of that as opposed to believe it to be circumstance, right? And serendipitous,
Interesting.
right? And
Very
so those are
interesting.
two different approaches to the game. Both are valid. On the other side of the little kid standing in the village going, "Oh my God, mommy, that's a blackbird." Now that can also happen because in the world, the term blackbird is sort of regional slang for vagabond or drifter.
Oh, I see.
It's
I
like
see.
it's so there's sort of there's like a linguistical understanding of this slang term of like, oh, that's just a blackbird or like whatever, and then
Okay.
there's also this truth of the blackbirds that once roosted in the trees of Yggdrasil that were like the messengers for the Norns, and so it sort of becomes this happy accident, and that's actually and that's the intention of the book, like being called blackbirds, is like it can appear quite superficial until you start scratching away at the surface and you're like, oh, there's all these meanings, and that's why the book is named this.
Okay. That's actually fantastic. And then let's talk about some more about the word and things that I found so interesting when I saw the game. And one of those is the oligarchs, and they are a very interesting bunch. First of all, I would like to say that I find the theme of a group of oligarchs separated from the rest of us, inflicting an unimaginable violence in the world that they will not have to deal with, and leaving the damage behind for the rest of us normal people deal with is very how should I say, it's very up with the times, you know. It's very modern, very present, let's say, on today's society, and which is one of the reasons I love it so much. I think thematic the game is great. And also when I saw the oligarch, especially when I saw one of the arts for them in the Kickstarter,
Hmm.
they reminded me a lot of the Hand of God in Berserk, also because even in appearance in some cases, but in representing mortals who ascended to someone be something greater through violence. And Can you tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about the
No, I
oligarchs
wanted.
because it's
Yeah, I
such a
wanted to.
cool concept.
Yeah, I wanted to let you, sort of muse because there's 2 points to the question, right? So the first, is there a relationship or an inspiration point between the oligarchs and the God Hand? And the answer is yes, because I've been thinking about the God Hand for a long, long time, and I was just like, I can't wait to sort of understand more.
Oh yeah,
Um, and I certainly was like, I don't think it's this. So I went this way. So when we came time to think about the oligarchs, I wanted to do something that was knowable. I wanted to do something very different from Miura's work in Berserk, where it's just a puzzle box, it's just mystery, and maybe he had intention, and we might not ever know what that intention was, but it's like watching an episode of Lost where they're adding episodes when the show was only supposed to run for 3 seasons, and they're just making stuff up to make it mysterious. I didn't want to do that with the Oligarchs for a number of reasons. When I have played role-playing games, other than Call of Cthulhu, which does it the best, right? And it's acceptable to have unknowable things that are just cosmic. And I was like, what if we brought the gods back to Earth a little bit? What if we approached it more through like a Greek lens of mythology, where the gods are people you might even be able to stab or punch, etc. And that led to an interesting inroad, because I think these fantasy world that have gods that you hear about but have no wants or needs or passions. They're not even, you couldn't touch them, you couldn't influence them, they barely influence you outside of spells. What if they were just people with some sort of known connection to the contemporary world? And then with regards to it being a parallel to, a thinly veiled metaphor for things going on in the world today. I don't know if you have this show Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, but you can watch it on YouTube. It's like a spoof of an author kind of pretending to be a Stephen King type who's like in love with his own writing and self, and he's very pretentious and egotistical. And there's a quote, and he's just like, "I know writers who use subtext, and they're all cowards."
Oh yeah.
So I was like, why don't we just in some places be very on the nose about a little bit about what's inspiring the book, because I know I need a catharsis.
Oh yeah.
It's not enough to play a game and just escape, because that to me is like infantilizing and childish. But I would rather have a chance at winning in a fight where justice will probably not be served, and that to me is good fantasy. So that's kind of why we did that.
Oh yeah, I think I told that to some friends the other day, but I think the fantasy of, well, no way, but the fantasy of being able to make a difference or make a stand through some injustice that are way bigger than you can imagine, um, is very powerful in a way. So the opportunity to face tyrants or corruption, and even if your solution is not permanent, you had that chance to stand up, is very, very powerful.
Feels good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my argument. From one kid who was bullied, as a child, like, who's now middle aged, still feels good.
Yeah. Oh, I believe me, I know what you're talking about. So yeah, so I think the oligarchs are a very interesting idea, and I think they are compelling antagonists and a compelling shadow to throw over the game overall. But the other shadow, another compelling thing that I loved when I saw, and that I must talk about that, we will talk about that more when you talk about the game systems. But the outsiders are so cool.
Yeah, so the Outsiders, we sat down to make the game. I knew I needed to get somebody on board who was sick of sort of the Vancian magic systems you see in games like D&D.
Oh yes, please.
And my friend Joseph Limbaugh, who designed the Theurgy system, we had a lot of back and forth talking about the Outsiders and what they were. Joseph was, and you should have him on the show at some point, very inspired by the old Chaosium Elric games, where you had to sort of treat with demons in order to get access to these spells. And I was like, this is 100% what medieval grimoires like are filled with. And this, I apologize, this is a little bit of a tangent, but
Feel free. Go ahead.
So at the time at the Getty, this was before coronavirus happened. There was an art show called Bestiary or something like this, or Monsters, I forget. It was at the Getty. You can probably look it up, which is a famous museum in LA that also doubles as like Starfleet Academy. They use that building a lot in the Star Trek movies, but it's this really cool space, and it's very close to where I live. And my wife and I went to the show a bunch of times, and because the first thing we discovered when we went was that these bestiaries that they were kind of advertising them were all magical occult grimoires. They were just like for the public. They weren't like hey, take a look at this book bound in human flesh, probably, because they were all from private collections, and it was like these books were crazy. And I remember like taking photos and getting in trouble with security and talking to Joseph and just going like, I am looking at 13th, 12th and 13th and 14th century grimoires right now. Like it is so clear that powers are tied to these beings, these devils, and whether that's the influence of Christianity or what have you, there's a lot, there's a lot of traditions of, sort of treating with these things from beyond, in all of like human mythology. I'm like, this has got to be it. And so that was the impetus. And then we just kept trying to outdo each other with outsiders, like writing up outsider descriptions, and he just did a tremendous job. The theurgy system is wild. The spells are all really unique. We call it a demon dating
Oh
simulator.
yeah, I have a topic on my list that is
Oh, sorry.
Demon dating thing.
Oh, sure. But anyway, it's a really, I love it. It's a work of brilliance, and I hope Joseph is proud.
Oh yeah, and they also brings everything you say was amazing, and especially the inspiration with actual um, medieval grimoires and stuff like that, because that's very interesting, and that's what we know then be about when you talk about where magic comes from. It's almost always a demon, a pact with some spirit or thing of that sort, and seeing that represented in the game is very cool. Um, and they also are, I think, one interesting thing, because when you talk about eldritch horrors, and they are usually unfathomable enemies and things of uh, incomprehensible power and malice, but the outsiders are that, but they are kind of your friend, or at least your ally, or not, or you are using or they are using you and you are using them. There is a relationship there. There is more than you will be corrupted and go mad. Maybe you will, but the relationship is different, and it's very cool. It's very unique, I think. When I think about RPGs and magic systems, the idea that you have to court your fount of power is very interesting, and especially, and we will talk more about that later if possible, if there are cool mechanics related
Yeah,
to
we can
that.
totally talk about it. Yeah.
Amazing. And I think the last thing I want to talk to you about, not the last thing, but topical thing about the setting. Uh, okay, two things. One is we have seen a lot of cities mentioned in the Kickstarter. We have seen High Salt and
Mhm.
have seen Corbo, I believe, the name of
Corval, yeah.
Corvo, yes, the name of the other. And is and they seem like very interesting places. We have vampires, we have um, eldritch things underground, and a military blockade, and they are places very prone to adventure and intrigue. But that got me thinking: is if the game is I don't think it will be, but let me ask the question. Is the game focused, is there a focus on urban kind of histories, or will there be really any kind of will be possible story will be possible in the game? I mean,
Are you talking about the idea of like a meta narrative that runs through the game, as opposed, or are you talking about historical influences on cities like High Salt and Corbel?
more of a meta narrative, actually. I was thinking
Oh,
about,
okay.
is this game fantasy that tends towards urban, or or
Oh,
not?
now I understand. So,
Okay, that's fine.
so the idea for me with the core book is whenever I play in other fantasy games, I always find myself in a cave fighting a spider, and that's fine. So I actually wanted to lean in a different direction. And since because I don't think anybody has a hard time telling a story about wilderness survival, or we all live on planet Earth, right? And it's an analog for a game like Blackbirds. And so we can be inspired by movies like The Sorcerer or whatever, just, like The Revenant. There's no shortage of reference for like, wilderness gameplay.
Of course.
And since Blackbirds is not a game that's about dungeon crawling, you don't get experience points for killing helpless goblins. Our goblins are not helpless, by the way. But like the idea is like I think everybody understands this, and so giving two cities as reference points on opposite sides of Erebos felt like a great starting point because it's like it could be an anchoring point for a tapestry, which is what we call campaigns. It could be a place you return to, a place you're trying to get to, a place you're trying to escape, and giving some sense of culture and the people who live in these places, I felt would really do a good job of informing the surrounding areas, because of course, Blackbirds is a core book. If it does well, there'll be more books. Like every single thing you see on Francesca's map, Francesca Barral, the artist who did all the beautiful maps. If you look at the map of Erebos, it even in the bottom shows the bit of another continent called Chrysius. It even shows an arrow pointing to another continent called Ulubos. And we would love to tell stories there as well, which would require getting the right sort of cultural assistance to sort of help paint those parts of the world. We've got some to start, but there would be more involved. But before I digress, that map is a sort of, what's the best? It's unreliable. It's a medieval map meant to be drawn by some sort of scribe going blind by candlelight. And it's like the best guess at the shape of Erebos. And so the city names you see on it are places of import. If you were to like just take Elkland, for example, and zoom in, Elkland is like as big as Reichland in like the old world. Like we're talking about like so many more places and hidden hamlets and stuff like that. So we just wanted to try to get, as much content in the book, but we chose to focus with, the north and the south, just so that, because people will create stories about whatever they want. And at least now they have two tones to use as sort of like, okay, this is the vibe in the south, this is the vibe in the north, and they can feel confident in sort of telling their own stories. And yes, while there is a meta plot to the game, I think we'll approach it in a way where people won't feel like their personal fantasies at their tables are being subverted. At least that's our intention.
Okay, that's very good, and that answers my question very well. And I also think that we are very well served with wilderness exploration and stuff. And personally, urban intrigue and that kind of stuff is more of up my alley. And I'm very happy that um, Blackbirds will um, be a good game for that kind of story. And then, okay, let's talk about a little bit about the systems of the game.
Okay.
And the first question that I got from Twitter is why Zweihander? And not in a in a bad way, but people are curious because these days we have so many interesting games being launched with for fifth edition D&D or with a new and original system. And um, why did you choose I think I know why, because Zweihander is awesome, but I would like to know why did you choose Zweihander for to power your game?
So there's a couple reasons, right? One, Zweihander is awesome, and I I was, I don't want to disparage anybody who loves the other games, but I do think that systems are built with intention, and they resonate a tone. And I have been a scholar of D&D for a long time. I've been a dungeon master for over 30 years or something at this point, and I came up through the many editions. Tim Kask has sat in this very house that I'm talking to you from. Like I've talked to the old timers, and I sort of but whatever, we're getting in the weeds. The idea is that not every system sort of resonates with every type of fantasy,
That's
and
very true.
Zweihander deeply resonates with dark fantasy. That was Daniel's intention, a grim and perilous system. He achieved it. He also wanted to sort of like, I would say, yank it out of the clutches of people who had attitudes about dark fantasy belonging to a certain specific demographic, which is just hilarious
Oh yeah.
and uninformed. And so there was a lot of positivity there. And then I had no intention of making um, Blackbirds. Blackbirds was my world in my head for my friends, and it was that's where it was going to stay. And one day I just tweeted, you know what, I'm going to keep running my game, which that at the time I was calling Carcass Nation, which is also like a term for
Oh, yeah,
Erebos. They're referred
nations
to as
in war and
the Carcass Nations. Yeah, that's where that comes from. But and I just tweeted like, I'm going to run it with this Zweihander system. It looks cool. Why didn't nobody tell me about this? And then Daniel, just because he's so active on social media, he was like, "Woohoo, that's awesome!" And then he, I guess, Googled me, and he's like, "Wait, you're a writer on Tigtone, on Adult Swim?" And I'm just like, "Yes." And then we just had this conversation go from there. And I said, "Look, dude, I would love to sort of bring an IP to Andrews McMeel, and would you be into that? And is that like cool?" And he was completely down, and opened up all the doors to make Blackbirds a reality. And so it was organic and mutual fandom that sort of led to the birth of this property.
that is very interesting and so cool. Daniel seems like a very cool guy, I should
He's got
say.
he's got his head on straight, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, especially when I remember when he nominated for an Annie, and there was some controversy, and the guy uh, navigated that very well. And not to
Yeah.
um,
No, no, it's
n-
okay, because I think that's something I'd like to address, and that was another thing that sort of um, afforded, like, I sort of grew more confident in watching that guy sort of zip and duck the slings and arrows of outrageous stupidity. And it was just I was just because man, I do not like social media. Like, let me put it this way: it's like, show me pictures of your cat, show me pictures of your kid, the bike ride you took. I don't want to talk about the rest, because nobody is undoing the injustices of the world on Twitter.
that is true.
And and then the passionate discourses all too often become anger, and it's a weird thing. Gaming is a weird thing. Gaming is a weird thing that was predominantly, you got to remember, people who buy games have disposable income, and it's like a certain demographic of person, and it's like, and for far too long, especially in America, it was a very specific, small, cloistered group of people, and they're still there complaining in the dark. And he did a
Yeah,
great job.
true. But hopefully they are ever more in the dark, and they will stay there
We
forever.
cast that spell on them.
Oh yeah. Um, and yeah, but I really think that gaming spaces are becoming a lot more progressive, and we will talk about that also because I think your team is very diverse, and that's a very interesting topic of conversation
Sure.
to be had. But we're talking about systems now,
Yeah.
and, and
I'm sorry, we're getting in the weeds.
yeah, that's fine, man. I love talking about that stuff, and I hope people in chat like that also. I think they will. Um, with systems of the game. Well,
Yeah.
you said earlier that the systems have intent, and I absolutely agree with you. One of the things that I, as a content creator and on the tabletop gaming space here, I try to do a lot is to impart the idea that systems matter and matter a lot. The kind of stories, the type of stories, the kind of experience you will have will be greatly influenced by the system you're playing, by the mechanics of your game. And I am a very big advocate that you should pay a lot of attention to the rules of a game and the systems and what they tell you and how they work. That's a very dear topic to me. And so when I see mechanics like let's start talking about the fate system, for example. when I see that your characters are touched by fate in the lore of the game, you are special. You have a little bit of um, the oh my god, the tapestry of fate with you, let's
Mm.
say. And then you have mechanics when you can flip a coin and change your past or change the future or see the future or change the present. And then you have a resource that you can use to move to not die, for example, to change the reality of the game. That's really cool. That's really amazing. That the let's say the lot of the game is so well supported by the mechanics. That's super important to me. And when I saw the fate system in particular, especially the three questions, I don't remember the names specifically, but I think it
Oh, the
was
Norns. Yeah,
yeah, the
yeah.
names of the three
Ern,
Norns.
Verandi, and Skold. Yeah.
Perfect. And that changes a lot about how you play that game. When I was talking about how do you play this game, when I was talking with chat on my earlier video, and one of them said, "So well, then you can't have a murder mystery. You can just flip a coin and ask who is the murderer." And then I responded, that's a possibility, yes, I think. And then I start thinking about maybe you can know who the murderer is, but you don't have any way to prove it, and that's a story in itself. And so I would like to ask a little bit more about that system and
Oh,
how it
sure.
how
Yeah.
it came to be and how it works. If you can talk, if you can.
I can. No, I can talk about. I mean, the game is on Kickstarter and it's coming out, and the systems are done. And feedback is welcome, and but it's there's no point in concealing it. And also, we're having these conversations on the Zweihander Discord. So while I apologize, to my Portuguese speaking friends who don't speak English, even though I am 25% Portuguese, which we realized in the we were talking about at the top of
Yeah,
the
and
show.
that was kind of impressive, actually.
I don't speak it myself, but yeah, if you speak English, come on over to the Zweihander channel, and even if you don't, because you can use Google Translator to see what I'm saying. So anybody should just, and I'll try to make time and go back and forth with you if you don't speak English as a native English speaker. Um, but we're talking about these things, and I'm like revealing stuff that's not even on the Kickstarter. The Discord, I put up one of the Outsiders in his entirety. We've put
Oh,
up
nice.
a videation in its entirety. But specifically about, so what you're calling fate are actually the three powers regarding the three sisters and what's left of them, I should say, is tied to the fortune token. It's not
Fortune,
tied to the.
yes,
It's not
fortune.
tied to the. It's not tied to the fate amulet. The fate amulet is, of course, that's an object on the Kickstarter. You could use any object in your house, I don't know. This could be you could have a giant Cthulhu. That's your fate. It doesn't matter. You don't need to buy any of the fancy stuff. We just wanted to make some fancy stuff because I like fancy stuff, but it's not necessary to play the game. You could use poker chips. But the idea is that yeah, the murder mystery example. Let's use that. So let's say that there's a murder mystery. The prince is dead. The Blackbirds are like, we need to figure it out. I'm going to use a point of fortune and look into the future or whatever. um, the rules as written say you can't lie, but it talks absolutely nothing about the specificity with which you need to give an answer. So the idea is
Oh,
that, like, I've used this currency, and the Fate Weaver who's giving you this vision, and how it manifests too is up to the Fate Weaver. Is it like a flashback in a movie, or is it a moment of is it a eureka moment? Is it a moment of inspiration that you just have intellectually? Is it a fever dream that comes later that night? All of these things are up to the Fate Weaver.
oh, so
So
so uh, the murder mystery question, I could answer who killed the king. I could answer Anubis.
yes, yeah,
Ah, okay,
or you could literally say like a blue velvet glove, or like
awesome.
like you just like, so every look,
Okay,
I love you gamers out there on the internet, but you're all a bunch of power gamers trying to break every system because you're jerks. But no, you're not jerks. It's in our blood, and we like to do this. But the idea is that it is a collaborative story. Blackbirds is a game of story arcs. It's not a game of levels,
Awesome.
you know. And so all of the systems are built to support fate weavers who might not be, you know, Hollywood writers, you know, like we basically. So I write professionally, you know, TV, film, and games, but the systems were built in a way where we cue you, like, because we're not asking you to have gone to film school or whatever. We're like, we give you all these tools where it's like, oh, this is a great cue to do this, or I could use this in this way, or I can suggest that, and it's all just like narrative conceits and structure to sort of help even like a fledgling fate weaver feel really confident in storytelling with their friends. So a lot of the systems are built this way. They're built specifically to cause drama. They're built to cause tension, which is where that's the pressure that creates story. And it's all, you know, we can go off, you know, into the cosmos talking about this stuff, but that is the intention behind those systems, especially Fortune.
Okay, I see. I see. That's very interesting. And I think you will the fortune system. I was actually using it wrong, the name wrong,
No, it's okay.
but no, it's fine. I but it's so cool. I really like it because it opens so many avenues of storytelling and possibility and gameplay and creative use of resources and all that. And there is also the how could I say, a danger in them, because then you are feeding your Fate Weaver with uh, dangerous tools. When I see the abilities that the monsters have that costs fortune points, they are terrifying. So I would.
We can address that really quickly, or do you have more? Finish. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you can. Let's go talk about it.
So first and foremost, there is going to be, I don't know when, I don't want to promise. I see Daniel in the chat too. I don't want to give him like a hot flash. But so the monsters we put on Twitter, right? We wanted to show the emerging audience our intention with some of the design and get early feedback. And so a lot of those monsters are using rules that are not the contemporary rules for Blackbirds, because like some of those came out years, like I think over a year ago, and we put them up on the Kickstarter because we wanted people to see them. At some point, we're going to actually update them to be much closer to the, like, if not exactly the contemporary rules. So, for example, there are no longer any misfortune powers that just kill a character. Like that has been removed from the game.
Yeah,
We
I was going to ask about that.
well, we play tested the heck out of the game. You know, I had a couple of groups going at the same time. Had a friend back east running a game under NDA and so on and so forth. And so we just realized that became sort of like a fate check. That like a power like that, let's say it's 5 misfortune, and then a whispering chimera just gets to eat you the end. And the only way to avoid such a thing would be to use your fate. Now, the only people who start the game with fate are humans, right? Elves and dwarves, the Aes and the Dame, they do not begin the game with fate. They have a lot of other advantages, but fate is not one of them. They must earn their fate by completing their dooming across the first arc of play, which we call the basic tier of play for people who are familiar with Zweihander.
All right.
And then the Jotunkin, their fate is sealed. They will never have fate. The world itself, like if we have any Dark Tower Stephen King fans in the chat, the world has moved on, and the Jotunkin have been left behind. Like this is the twilight of their age. Now maybe in the future we may open up some glimmers of hope and light for them, but right now, as the world stands, when you choose to play a Jotunkin, you'll have you're literally playing a half giant. I've always wanted to play a half giant, and I've never had a system do it right. So we're like, yeah, you can have reach, you can have extra damage, you can like make toughness checks and maybe not take any damage at all. Here's the entire giant fantasy, but you don't have fate, and when you're dead, you're dead. It's like playing the game on nightmare mode. It's like, so, but anyway, I hope that sort of answers the question. I don't know if it did. I need like coffee or some iced tea or something.
Man, you are doing great. many of my questions are being addressed in a
Good,
very
good.
satisfying way.
Good.
Because yeah, I was going to ask about the Chimera, and indeed, it was literally a fate check, as you said. Uh,
Yeah.
if you have if you have it or you don't, because and I actually think removing this kind of mechanic is better for the game. I think I have
Yep.
not played, but it seems better for the game.
It is
And
out. And it's the Whispering Chimera is still horrible. And
yes, it is really horrible. It, it,
yeah.
as most of the monsters are terrifying. Uh, it, however, one of my favorites. I am getting ahead of myself a little bit, but I don't care. One of my favorites was when I saw in on Twitter a few months ago, which was I think it was kind of a cinnamon bird. Um,
Oh, the Cynomolgus. Yes.
it's so
Yes.
cool, and I love the idea that you are going that great hunt to get a little bit of spice. It's so cool, and
Yeah.
it's such an interesting animal and such a cool way of doing world building.
That well, thank you because you nailed it on the head. So the idea with the bestiary, and this was the intention at first established by Joe Carricker, who's a great writer and designer who was on the project for a few months and then because of complications, left the project, but he's still a close friend and someone we love. He was just like, oh my God, there's this in medieval times, people thought cinnamon came from a bird, and I'm like, that's got to be a real thing, because it's just a great, as you said, it's a great way to world build, and it's real. And then of course the next thought I had was, how do I make the Cynomolgus like sort of like the lore around it sort of matter, and then Joseph took a design pass on making it like an incredibly dangerous creature that sort of you don't expect to be an incredibly dangerous creature, but the Cynomolgus is one of my personal favorites. Even though I think right now we say it's appropriate for like a group of, we don't give CR difficulties in this game. We don't sort of, let me be clear. I think game design balance is the enemy of drama
Hell
and
yeah,
fun. So in Blackbirds, these some things are going to be easier to deal with than others, and other things are just nightmares. And I think like having that sort of pendulum swing in the extremes, especially when the world kind of, you can run a very mundane game where you're fighting sort of like city guards or brigands or whatever, and you might yawn at that, but there's a lot of great stories you can tell with sort of those simple things. And then when you introduce the idea of like the Children of Helios or a Cynomolgus or something like that, be prepared for. I don't know if anyone's a fan of Kingdom Death Monster, the board game, but that was sort of that's a big inspiration for how we designed things that are supernatural or fantastical. Um, and the Cynomolgus is definitely one of those things.
oh yeah. I mean the, the monsters are a very interesting part of the bestiary, as you said, is a very interesting part of the game, and the Cynomolgus is one of my favorites. And so I also want to talk about my other favorite of the monsters that I have seen so far because of the tragedy involved, and that's the Harpies. The They are so tragic. The idea, as I said, the game is the setting is a setting in which a terrible violence was inflicted upon the world, and you see the um, repercussions of that in many ways. And when you see a former servant of the gods who used it to ferry souls, a noble calling, if you say, and now they are a kind of a mockery of the former selves and a tortured existence, and they are a terrible problem to which there is no good solution. If you run if you encounter one of those, there is nothing you can do. It will always end in tragedy because they are tragic and the souls they capture are a problem that needs to be solved. And it's so interesting. The That monster it but just reading the description of that monster, I got so many ideas for adventures and stories I could tell um, using that because they are such an interesting tragic creature.
Well, I mean, we appreciate that. So, you know, back in the early days when I was, being interrogated by the Blackbirds team, I got questions like, well, what does it mean for the gods to be dead? The old gods, the unknowable ones, being Yggdrasil, Corvus, Ouroboros, the dragon that is the world. Um, you know, um, Corvus is the raven god, and the god that the Harpies once worshipped, the rider, this enormous horse that sort of rides once, was sort of the Neptune-like figure in the world, and so on. And those are the apex gods. Those are like the boss gods, and there are like sub gods that we will maybe get into in the future, but those are the big ones. That's like talking about Poseidon and Zeus. That's like
Yeah.
the top of the pile. They are not the only gods, so that's one distinction we should make. Um, but the idea of like, what do you do when if you're the ferryman taking people to the afterlife, and then that process breaks, and so the example of the Harpies was the example that I think like is the purest in a lot of the ways as to sort of denoting the tragedy, as you put it. There are other good examples, but we also wanted to create monsters that could be in some ways sympathetic, and then also that might elicit a different response, other than violence. Although I love action, violence. There's nothing wrong with wanting to chop stuff up in your games, and anyone who tells you otherwise on Twitter is like just smelling their own farts. The idea, like, play the game the way you want to play it, but the idea is that like maybe you would be, given an excuse to take pause as you raised your sword, right? Because you're like,
Yeah.
what am I doing right now? Like, is this fixing anything? And so to have a sort of paradoxical creature like the harpy in a game, and games are known for being quite violent, like we hope that maybe that narrative might sort of beg to ask the question of like, should I slay, or should I try to think of a more creative solution?
Oh yeah.
And there's no judgment on either end. It's just, like, maybe if games are performance art, you'll take away your own learnings that I never, and the team never intended for you to sort of take away. So we try to make those opportunities happen.
Also, let's talk a little bit about one thing you said, because I was going to talk about a little more about monsters, but you talk about games as performance art, and that's a very interesting take when I read that in your introduction. I believe in the 16 pages you put on drive through. I think there is a paragraph there about how games are art and form of performative art, and that raised a few eyebrows over here. And some friends of mine was like, "That's a very interesting way of seeing games," and I myself have never um, stopped and think about games and RPGs as performance art, but it makes a lot of sense when you think about them that way. It's a very interesting take, and can you can you talk a little bit more about that vision, because
Yeah,
it's
no,
very
I
interesting.
I can. Well, I have to give credit, right? Again, this is like one of the ravings of Rainier Harrison, right? And my mentor, right? And I don't know when we had the conversation. It must have been in his house once, in the backyard, just talking about it. But he was talking about Eve, and I don't want to give away, secrets or what have you. He has his own company now. He's doing different things, and my good friend Berger Finnbogason is like the creative director of Eve now. It's like I'm quite happy that my CCP family is thriving. Um, but Ray was like, Eve is his performance art. It's like it's a whole bit of performance art about the issues of capitalism and resource and demand, and who has and who needs, and the pressures that creates, and then the outcome being war. And it's performance art that he didn't have to perform. So it's like the laziest form of performance art. And that sat with me, and I was like, because I was like, oh wow, this guy's 1,000 times smarter than I'll ever be. And but then I just stewed on it for years. And then go, okay, that's what's happening with these games, and that's why, you know I always felt so close and intimately connected to my game table and the stories we told that went nowhere. And everybody, I think, shares that. I mean, of course, there's some groups that are not fun, and then you're
Of
always
course.
looking for the group that is fun. But when you find it, you have this experience. You're like, wow, like that was great. It was like 16 seasons of my favorite television show, and no one but us is ever going to see it or hear it or have the memory of it. And so it became very clear that that's what it was, and that's why the community is so passionate, even if sometimes those passions get stupid and ugly. But like that's why it's so passionate, I thought. And then, so we came to Blackbirds, which is an act of world building, which is an intellectual property, and there is a story, and I have an intention for the way I would express it. But I am actually, in many ways, more interested in seeing how others will express it. And even though, like, I will write tapestries if we're lucky enough to get the opportunity to do more than just this core book, um, and I hope that I hope that the community just sees that as like, oh well, that's just Ryan's take on Blackbirds, because I don't want it to devalue your work when you're sort of weaving a tale for your flock. And I want those stories to sort of elevate and reach out into social media and sort of numb out and drown out some of the ugly stuff, because that's really cool. So yeah, it's
Of course.
performance art, right? It's why the weirdo takes a horn and shoves it in a hole somewhere and dances on the street corner. It's like maybe to just distract us for a moment about the ridiculousness of our lives or the suffering of a 9 to 5 or whatever's on your mind in that moment. And so I don't know, but we could wax philosophical for hours and
Of course.
we could put chat to sleep very easily.
But that was a very interesting thing overall, and I like to think about a lot. I think a lot about games, and thinking of them with that perspective was very good. Okay, so I said few minutes ago that we would talk about systems, and we have talked very little about systems. So let's try to go back to systems.
All right.
And okay, one of the things that aside from okay, so we talked about the fortune system, and then there's the fate system. When you
Mm,
talk about the fate system on the Kickstarter and stuff, I see that it's a very powerful mechanic, and you can override a lot of stuff with that. But I don't have many details on how that works. Can you explain a little bit more how
sure.
the fate system works?
Yeah, my pleasure. So the fate system is the ultimate interrupt in the game. It is, if you have fate to sort of spend, um, you can sort of it's a reaction, and it can be a reaction to a great many things. I mean, so for example, the most obvious use of fate would be to sort of interrupt and deny a blow that might kill a blackbird, right? It's like the spiked mace is coming arcing down out of the smoke filled room. You're like, okay, this is it, right? And then you use your fate, and basically that didn't happen. That blow misses, right? Like the world bends in a certain way. And so it's a bit of narrative control to give to some of the players, where they have a little more agency in the story. And it's not meant to be seen as like bad fate weaver insurance, but it's certainly just it's like, let's share some agency and be able to have that moment. And there's a lot of other powers, by the way, that work in a similar way. They're not as powerful as fate, but their outcomes are like determined, like extinguish abilities, for example,
Oh yeah.
because we wanted players to sort of like not sort of just be belittled and bashed, even though it's a very dark and grim world. Um, we want you to feel like, John Wick is a very grim world, but like Keanu feels quite powerful, right, in that role. And so we're like, oh, how do we do that with a system? And so fate is a way to sort of like supersede and briefly take command of the narrative in the response to something,
Interesting.
usually external, usually not rolled by the player. So it is not like a good way to say re-roll a die. That is the job of fortune. Fate exists at like a meta level above fortune.
Interesting.
And this is something you don't know. You could, in certain circumstances, unfortunately not the Jotunkin, if you were at a game table and let's say your friend Cynthia, her blackbird used their fate earlier that weaving, and so it's gone. So the safety cord is gone. They've got to survive the weaving, get to the end of it, and then flip a coin to see if it comes back. and if it doesn't come back, they got to survive another game, and there's rules for that coming back. It's the same idea. You would flip 2 coins at the end of the next session, and then
Oh, I
if
see.
that still doesn't work, you flip 3 coins at the end of the third session. But if you saw this person's character getting into trouble, and they are a character that naturally has fate, you could actually share your fate with them,
Oh,
and you could sort of intervene on their behalf, just as long as they're not Jotunkin.
that's the only thing that is very interesting, and that supports a read I have of the game that I will talk in a second. But I would also say, because you mentioned the Jotunkin before, and I think the idea of playing a doomed race is very very interesting, and or
Does it feel at all familiar? I'm sorry. No, I'm just looking outside my window. Like, yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But it is very interesting because you start to asking yourself questions that maybe you would not. What do I do with the time that I have left? The very different questions than what do I want to achieve, for example. And
Hmm.
that's one of the reasons I think the Jotunn are so cool. But okay, that's one thing. So talking about fate and exhaust abilities, which we will talk a little bit about them too. One thing that I see a lot in dark fantasy and that I don't particularly like is the idea that your character is disposable, that
Mm.
he is so fragile that anything can kill him, and that tension is good in a way, but especially when you are playing on an RPG and you tend in a more modern one, let's say that as well, you tend to become attached to your characters and want to then to experience great things and do amazing stuff. And when uh, I don't know, a critical hit from a wiki goblin that doesn't matter because the goblin per se is not interesting, kills you, you become frustrated, and that's a thing that is very common in dark fantasy in gaming, is the idea that your character is disposable. And I don't think, and when I saw Blackbirds, one of the first things that I noticed is that your character is not disposable. The world is dangerous, but you have a lot of tools to mitigate that danger when if used smartly. And I think it's very good design for the game to have that kind of to have those tools available to your players so they can feel the dangers. And I like a lot when you say on your um, dark fantasy, green dark fantasy, epic fantasy thing. You say dagger in the back is very dangerous and kill you. That's true, but at the same time so you fear the assassin in a dark hallway. You know that you have that one stray attack, or I don't know, one bad roll of the dice will not kill your character because you have tools, and and your character feels competent, and that's very
Hmm.
important. I think I like that a
Yeah.
lot.
Well, good. That was the intention. I mean, because it's so funny. The pedigree of the dark fantasy games that are in the market today, um, to a certain degree, and I don't want to speak, for Daniel and so I think get this bad rap of being like it's a misery simulator,
Oh
says
yeah.
big thinker on the internet. And actually, it's like there's more agency in these systems for like heroic moments and survivability than there are in a lot of other systems. I mean, certainly fifth edition has made it very difficult to die with
Oh yeah.
multiple death saves and what have you. But I would argue if we go in the way, way, way back machine, and we're not talking about these games, but if we just talk about like Warhammer Fantasy Second Edition back in the '80s. It was a more forgiving system than Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and people just refused to. I mean, mathematically, true, right? And but people will not agree with you because of the branding.
Oh yeah.
They're like, "Oh no, it's this and that. It's dark fantasy." Yep, 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 and and it's just manipulating people's perceptions. And but there's this tradition of the illusion of cruelty, and a lot of the times that was actually one of the design pillars of Blackbirds was this term, the illusion of cruelty, and because it is dark fantasy. In fact, it's horror fantasy. We're not even dark fantasy. We're horror fantasy, and but it's built to be fun and cool and to make you feel powerful in a world gone mad. Because personally, I don't feel very powerful in today's world. And so this fantasy was written at first by myself and then with a team of like 7 other humans who agreed that wouldn't it be lovely to feel powerful against this tide of darkness. And that became the impetus of all of this. And the idea that like characters should just be like squished across the pavement, on a whim. It's why we got rid of the insta-kill powers from the bestiary. It didn't align with any of our design principles. And so yeah, you are not disposable. There will be loss. There
Oh
will be
yeah,
death. If players choose to use the injury system, things might go missing off of your body, but that's an option. You don't have to run the game that way. We have an alternate system in there where you're like, if you don't want to do injury, you don't have to. If you want to
yeah,
carve each other up, go for it. Because I like the carving, but not everybody likes the carving, right?
true.
Because it's transformative. Again, it's an issue of agency and respecting the character. I like it when insane things happen to my character because I'll find a story to weave into it. But someone else might just go like, I would prefer to keep my arm, and that's fine too. So
Yeah,
we're conscious of this whole idea of you know respecting this boundary, and then also we actually have built-in session zeros in the game, and it's called the threading, and
that's
it's actually
so important.
yeah,
That
it's in there.
that was on my list of things to ask because it's so important. That and safety tools. I imagine you have those too.
Well, actually, so here's the thing: we do not, because there are
Interesting.
people who commit their whole lives and their primary function as designers are designing safety tools. So there are safety tools that exist that are more thought out than anything that we would bring to the table. And so that the idea of X cards or however you want to approach it, those
Of course.
tools are written by smarter, better people who have specifically made them. So we have some suggestions as to like
Oh
which
yeah,
might be
that
good.
was what I meant because even
Oh yeah,
I don't know, Pathfinder Second Edition has a suggestion of a bad, well thought out system designed by someone else.
yeah. It's like the people who do that they're brilliant in their own way, and me writing a safety tool system is going to come off like a very disengaged stepfather, like at a little league practice, like just
Totally,
clapping and looking off somewhere else. Like
that makes
it's
sense.
just
Why
it's
not
not my
use the
passion.
great work that people did? That makes sense for me.
Yeah.
And then we talked a little bit about the exhaustion powers and the slotting system. I should say, are we good on time? Can we keep going? We're fine.
For me,
Yeah, on
oh yeah,
time.
I'm just looking at my phone because I
Oh
need
no, no,
dopamine
no.
and I'm an addict. No, yeah, I know. I'm completely fine. Yeah. We can
That
keep.
was not the case. Just because we have been doing this for an hour and a half. So,
Oh no,
uh,
it's fine. Yeah, I can hang out for a little while. And this is my favorite system because I designed it. But no, it's like yeah, no, it's
uh,
all right. Yeah, we can totally talk about this because this is, I think, one of the more exciting aspects and it's unique to Blackbirds too.
yes,
So
that was one thing that I personally like a lot. And okay. Let me go on a little tangent here, but one thing that I like a lot when I see a game system is usability. And what I mean by that is that there are great games that are not very usable or actually playable. That is, you see that there was a lot of thought in on design and systems and mechanics, but when you resolve to play them, they are very hard to make work. And one of the, especially when the games start becoming more and more complex. And I love the fact that board games usually have good solutions for that kind of stuff because they are so tactile. You can put this piece here, and then that super complex mechanic is resolved and visualized by you. And so when I saw the character sheet for Blackbirds and the slotting system, and I thought that was brilliant because you solve very complex things about your character, about powers, about abilities, and choice and level, and a lot of stuff like that. And in a very simple and tactile way, I know I can use this because this card is here, and I use this power, and so I flip this card, and then my fate is placed in this point of my sheet, and then I move it over here when I use it. And I love that stuff. I think more games should do that. And so I would like to ask you, what, how did you come up with that stuff? Because I think it's very interesting.
So, um, well, first of all, I want to shout out to Rob Sather, who is our designer for the character sheet and a lot, and some even some art in the book, and just they're they're wonderful. One of my favorite human beings on the planet, and have been working deeply as one of our art directors for a long time, and hopefully a long time to come. Um, but that's Rob's brilliance you're seeing. It's now to I'll take only this much credit. So as a dyslexic with ADHD, growing up in the 80s in America, um, there were these mysteries about my ability to do certain things and not others. And so I was poked and prodded like an X-Man in these, like, these offices with like, play with the color blocks and do this and, like, and it was just, I felt like a lab rat. But like some of the things that I grew to understand about myself was, I was a visual thinker, and I needed tactile reference points like flashcards to learn my multiplication tables. And these lessons in education, which my family gave me so much support in, directly fed into my desire to create. Look, Blackbirds is not your first RPG. If it is, bless you. But like, it's like, it is not young adult. It is complicated. It is not rock. It is prog rock. Like, we wanted to make, there's a lot of cowbell in there for no reason in some places. This is very specifically like a prog rock level of complexity and production, which some people might go, well, that's overproduced and that's too much production. But I was like, but it's like you said, if there are points of reference and ways to keep a complicated system knowable, that was another design philosophy we followed, which is we can be as complicated as we want to be, as long as it is easy to explain.
Sure.
And that then led to the idea of physical tokens, which of course Vinehander uses to a certain degree, and that led to the idea of, there was like a play. I was like, oh, maybe we can make a play mat, because a lot of board games that are super complicated, like Scythe or what have you, they use those board maps that, or to tell you what to do, and I love them.
Yes.
Kuhlman does such a great job with the craziest of systems, and that was a major inspiration. And then as we sort of walk the scope back a little bit to just a character sheet you could print, when you look at it, it is still very much like a board game playmat. And so all of your observations are correct, and that is how it came to be. But the who, all that goes to Rob Sather.
Awesome. And then there are the powers themselves, which are very. I think it is. They are divided in techniques and traits. Is that right?
Talents and
Talents,
techniques.
talents and
Yes.
techniques.
Yeah.
I should have done my research better.
No, no, no. It's okay. There's a
um,
lot.
but they seem very interesting, and one of them is more passive, and one of them is more active, right? And from the
Typically.
descriptions I have seen, and they are cards that you have printed, or you have the beautiful tarot-sized deck, and you can use them, and and you can change them every time you rest, and at the start of every session of the game, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So you have imagine you have a deck of cards, and you choose between among them, and then play for that moment.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
that seems like such a cool thing for game design. And as a player, I love problem solving, and the idea that I can, okay, have this challenge. When I rest, I will use this technique, and that will help me for the next X things that I will do. And I don't have access to all of them all the time, so I have to choose, and choice is interesting. Um, but tell me how you get that stuff. I mean, they are tied to your paths, as I saw, but and I imagine they are one of the major progression systems in the game. I imagine getting more of those, or I'm wrong there.
Yeah. No, no, you're right. So there's a couple, like so many things in Blackbirds, it's usually asymmetrical, on purpose, because when you bend things out of sight, it creates an air of mystery and etc. But like,
Oh,
the easiest way to express this is at character creation. Just like with Course Right-Hander, you get a certain amount of RP to spend, and so initially you already are open to looking at techniques within the path you have chosen to participate for that first arc of a character's life. So basic tier, I'm going to be, let's say, bow and blade. I can look at rank 1 bow and blade techniques, and I could buy. There's sort of like a numerical value of you can only buy so many. You're always going to have to make a choice, and there's no way you can buy all of them. So there's no way to sort of like have every single technique in the system in play in a single character's lifetime or whatever their story arc happens to be across all 3 levels of play.
Okay,
But
great.
you can get access to techniques instantly, and so that's how a path technique works. It basically asks you how many ranks in a path do you have. That's the gate, and then there's an RP cost associated with it, and then there's basically how big the deck can be. So just like any kind of, if it were a card game, it's like you only get to draw X number of cards and have so many things in your hands. It's a very familiar system that everybody's going to be comfortable with. Then there are things like weapon techniques, and so the gate there is how many skill ranks one has in, let's say, melee. And so a weapon technique might require you to have 3 ranks in melee, which means you're in advanced tier, and others might ask only for 1. And then you can also buy, so each weapon also in the game has an associated weapon technique, because I didn't want weapons to just, it's not just like, it's like, why is, this is a bad example, but like, why is, a hand axe a D6 and a longsword a D8? Unless I'm using it two-handed, then it's a D10. And it's elegant and cool, but it doesn't feel like anything. And the D6 always feels suboptimal to
Yeah.
the D10, right? And so we wanted to make every single weapon dangerous and cool. And so that is a thing too. And then there's other techniques that specifically the Odic techniques. There are some that are just associated with the path of Odd and Ritual, but then there are those that are gated behind the relationship of the demon dating simulator, where it's like, how much does your outsider like you? If they like you enough, maybe they'll offer you a technique.
Awesome.
And so so that's an example of like, there's a lot of that going on. But then, of course, in basic tier, you can only ever slot 1 talent and 1 technique. And then in intermediate tier, 2 talents, 2 techniques, and then in advanced tier, 3 and 3. Your hand, you're probably going to have like 18 cards.
Oh, I see.
So, like you're going to be like, what am I doing and how am I doing it? Maybe less, but yeah, so you're
Yeah,
always going to
the
have
point is you
more.
have a lot more options than you have slots for them.
That's right. That's right. And so, and yeah, and you can never have everything, even in the core book, let alone when we create other books, if we get that opportunity, because
Oh.
we're just going to make more talents and techniques. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
they seem very cool, and the whole system is a very, and I love the idea of putting them on cards, because as we said before, it simplifies a complex system a lot. Looking at a one card is a lot easier than look at, I don't know, a list of a gigantic list of things,
Yeah.
and which reminds me that one big difference between Blackbirds and Zweihander is the paths, because in Zweihander you have a billion classes
Yeah.
or jobs. I don't remember the specific terms, but you have,
Brief moments in time, like like tears in the rain, right? Like Zweihander that like 78 professions
yes,
is like 78 punchlines in a world that is going to smash you up against a carriage wheel, but like it's a different design intention,
of
and
course,
still was inspirational to us, because each of those professions, of course, usually had like a special power,
yes,
and those special powers definitely informed our approach to talents and techniques.
very interesting. And one thing I must say is that a lot of this um, Blackbirds will be a very big book. 688 pages, I believe, or something like that, you say in the Kickstarter. And this is also a very big book, but a
Yeah.
lot of this book are professions. So I'm very curious to see what will fill that space on Blackbirds. I'm very interested to see that.
No, I can talk a little bit. It's going to be the biggest chunks of the book are going to be things like the bestiary, things like
Awesome.
theurgy, things like talents and techniques. Yeah, I mean, we want to get people up and running in a meaningful way. And so you have to have these core systems really well represented. Maybe again overproduced, but that was the intent, that was the plan from the
Do, do,
start.
do you
And
remember
yeah,
that quote about I know authors that use subtext and subtext and they are all cowards?
yes, yes,
There
of
is
course.
no such a thing as overproduced.
No, yeah, that's yeah. No, Garth Marenghi is my spirit animal, and but the idea, so the intention was make a book that was everything. It was like the player's handbook, it was the
Of course.
DMG, it was the BC, because like you don't know what the market's going to say. I mean, we hope that people love it and we get to keep doing this, but for whoever buys this book, I wanted them to be like, okay, like if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, like
I see,
it's
I
like
see.
you're still set up,
I have
you're gonna
years
do
of
good,
play
kid.
here.
Yeah,
Okay, I see that.
yeah.
And so, before we move on, let's talk about my favorite thing on the whole game so far, and that's
Okay.
the Gmon dating sim, the magic systems, and the idea of the outsiders, and how that magic works, and the what was the name? I think it was not requests. It's something I saw that one on an interview with you a long time ago. Um, a thing that the
Reckonings.
reckonings, yes. So
Reckonings,
can you
yeah.
tell us about a little bit about mechanically how the outsiders work?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. So, how do the outsiders work? The outsiders, the best metaphor is think of them as nasty living spell books, right? That you have to keep happy. And
That's so cool.
that's pretty much the easiest way to think about the outsiders. And a Theurge who starts the game on the path of odd and ritual begins play with one imp of their choosing. They get to choose one of the imps from one of the 6 courts, which all sort of um, have their own sort of relationships to one another. Some courts don't like other courts, and that will get complicated as you try to catch more of these demonic Pokemon, and add more spells to your. So it's like that. It's basically dating sim meets Pokemon, and the Pokemon all hate each other and are miserable little shits. And that's how theurgy works at the end. No, so and it's also like so the whole idea is I always loved old D&D when it was like I need a sprig of
Yeah.
this mushroom and a piece of a raven's tooth, and and everyone else was like, we hate that, we hate components.
Spider
And so we're
web,
like,
so you can do that. Yes, like
so it
that
was like,
stuff a
how do
lot.
we do components without doing components? And this concept that Joseph came up with of a debt, a form of debt. And so you're constantly going into debt with your outsider or outsiders, and that debt is called tithe. And we used to have very granular, bespoke expressions of tithe that were like super duper specific things that you had to do. And we decided that that was like the antithesis of narrative freedom for Fate Weavers and Flocks. And so instead, we reduced it to an abstraction of, every time you attempt to cast a Vidiation, your tithe goes up. And as that number swells, there are metaphysical and physical ramifications in some cases, and systematic ramifications to dice rolls and performing magic. And it gets to the point where the magic may fizzle and stop. And it also is tracking a power, not a power, but basically a currency called spite, which only the Fate Weaver is aware of, and only the Fate Weaver knows how much your outsider hates you. And so basically, it's this ability of paying off. And these numbers are small. We're not asking people to do like calculus, but it's like, like paying off one's tithe usually requires performing reckonings. Those are requests made of you by your outsider. And clever Fate Weavers, again, can use these as narrative
Yes.
inputs. It's like, slip this key into this prisoner's cell. Why? I'm not telling you. It's like, what's that about? You know what I mean? So you're basically caught in this spider web of intention of the outsiders, and maybe even the oligarchs are caught in that web too, by the way. And theurges are 100% caught in that web, because if they want to access the odd or the ood, depending on how you want to pronounce it, the gatekeepers are the outsiders. And so it's like it's basically we want so we give a list of like, these are the things outsiders like, but we don't tell you specifically. And the weight of the task increases as so if you're paying off a lot of tithe, the request might be horrible. If you're paying off a little bit of tithe, it might be an adorable little bit of prankery, like throw this egg
That's
at
so
that
cool.
nun, But then it's like kidnap like the last heir of the Vidivici family. It's like what? Yeah. So it escalates quickly.
Oh, that's so cool. I remember seeing and so one other thing before I comment on that. How do so you make the outsider happy by doing the reckonings and paying your tithe, right? That's
Yep.
how the mechanic works. Okay,
Yep.
fantastic.
Yeah.
And I remember when I saw the interview, and there was one outsider that was I don't remember the name, but it was a like a mathematical concept and fractals and stuff. And he asked
I think
people,
that's Zox. Is that Zox? It might be Zox, but yeah, okay.
and
Yeah.
and, and I think one of his reckoning was you have to mark people with mark things with symbols, and because he wants to
Yeah.
calculate the universe or something like that.
Yes.
And I remember reading that and thinking, wow, that's amazing. Because imagine asking, because you can do that thing with, as you said, on a simple reckoning, you can say, please mark that chair. I don't know, mark that window of that cathedral. Okay, and on a very high, and on a dangerous or expensive reckoning, let's say that you can ask your players something like, "Mark that person's liver," and
You
that's
So
so cool.
I don't have any notes for that interpretation. That seems exactly accurate. You should definitely have. I don't also want to spoil some horrible things that Joseph, who designed the theurgy system, he is first of all an amazing improviser. So it'll be a hilarious and fun interview for you. But
I
he
love the
also
fact that you say that because now I want to do it a lot.
oh, you should totally do it. And but he also has this deep love of cosmic horror and like I think that sucks, but like there's a number of outsiders and my brains are kind of boiling right now. But that is absolutely how things could escalate. But the idea is that instead of saying very specifically, oh, you owe this outsider 16 tithe, mark that sheriff's liver, like we sort of want that to be something that the fate weaver have some flexibility about. And also
Oh,
what
I
we think
see. You leave the.
yeah,
Okay, okay, I understand better
yeah,
now.
so there's no recipe. 16 doesn't equal reckoning. There are examples of reckonings, but I think the intention, especially because knowing it's always like here's a cue to do a thing a certain way, and then we definitely want you to augment it for your specific game group.
Ah, that's great
um
because
you know
yeah, you give control of tone, for example, for your Fate Weaver, and that's very good. You can be very dark or very not so dark. I mean,
yeah, you don't
it
have to be.
always be
Yeah.
dark, but not that dark. I mean, you know what
I mean, yeah, I mean, there's the way. I mean, even when I run the game, and I mean, you can ask my players whatever, but you know, I I love taking things into like serious points of darkness, of course, within the safety boundaries.
Of
Like
course.
like I kind of the people I've been playing with so long, I know kind of what's in and out. And but then I love it to have like moments of like just sheer irreverent like joy and joking because there's
Oh yes,
that's I mean like yeah it's like I my favorite forms of media always you have to have some laughs in there,
of course.
and I love gallows humor as well, so Blackbirds lends itself to that.
That is very interesting. And I think the last thing I want to ask about systems is the progression system. That's very important for most of RPGs. And you have said already that you don't earn XP for killing monsters. That's not a thing. And so, how do you earn XP on?
It's really so there was a lot about Zweihander we liked, which is like the idea of we call RP points, sort of in the umbrella family of games in the powered by category, right?
Of
And so it's
course.
very similar. It's like was there good role playing? Did everybody have fun? Here's like 1 point for being at the table, and all of that sort of really resonated with a lot of the Blackbirds design staff because I think a third of us are all ex White Wolf employees,
Oh
including
wow,
myself, right? And so,
really? That's
yeah,
very interesting.
and so we all grew up in the storyteller system and cut our teeth there with this concept of you get 1 to 3 points, or maybe 5. It's at the end of a chronicle or whatever. But like, so it's a hybridization of our experiences as White Wolf designers and what Daniel had previously done in Zweihander. And we're like, yeah, don't fix what ain't broke. So if anything, whenever we looked at Zweihander, we're like, if it's good, great. Does it match our thematic intentions? If not, maybe we change it. And then they're like, oh, is it overly complicated? We would be like, oh, what's Flames of Freedom doing? We had a lot of great resources to look at, and then to make choices about either reducing complexity or adding it.
Very interesting. I say that the last, but actually there was another thing that I want to talk about,
Sure, yeah, I'm
and
not in a rush.
there is action points, I believe, on and or because I saw on the Kickstarter that when you roll initiative, you gain a certain amount of I think it's action points. Might be another thing that you can spend to do things on your turn.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct. And if I remember correctly, and that I read Zweihander a long time ago, but that's not a thing in there. That's a new thing, right? A new system.
It is a new system. We added a couple of crazy things. For a number of reasons, right? I wanted to make a system where surprise rounds could be achieved more often by a flock of blackbirds. Like in a lot of games with surprise systems, it's almost exclusively used as like a brick to smash the play. Like the GM is like, haha, surprise round. So I think, created a very compelling surprise round where it's not guaranteed to be surprised. It's a bespoke round, so it's added complexity. And then if a surprise round is not happening, which I don't want to get into right now, we can talk
Of
about it in a
course.
future podcast. We have the opening round, which is basically round one. And in round one, when everyone gets all of their AP at the top of the round, because we didn't want people who like fell at like ladder in the phase. We didn't want this sort of highly driven by initiative, because we randomize initiative turn to turn, unlike Zweihander. So you roll in initiative every round in Blackbirds. And the opening round, we didn't want to sort of like throw the fight in either direction, but we're happy to do that in round 2 and round 3. And so it's like a choice with how sort of
I see.
the threads pull apart as combat advances. Yeah, so
And
so that's sort of why we made those decisions.
I see. And the idea of action points, I find interesting the use of them because I think, and we talked a little bit about other games, and I personally like a lot of I like Pathfinder Second Edition a lot, and I think one of the better things they did was the three action economy. That you have essentially three action points that you expend to do things on your turn. And I think, and when I saw your system, I thought it's similar because some actions have a different cost. This costs two, this costs one, this costs three, and you can then look at your actions as a resource in a way, and then is that the way it works? I mean, could you how can I say that? Do you have actions that costs a number of points, let's say, and then you have points, and how you use them is up to the player? Is that the way the
Yes,
system
that's
works?
exactly right. Yeah,
Okay,
that's exactly right. And so there's these sort of basic actions, which are just like, I want to swing my sword, I want to parry, I want to dodge, I want to cast a videation, right? Or they're all very basic, and they cost a certain amount of AP. And then if you look at the example technique card, which I think is Agatite Swordsman on the Kickstarter, it also shows you that those things too also have an AP cost.
yes,
And so everything is a menu based on the AP. And really the choice that the player is making, which I like, is how all in am I going in this moment? How many AP am I going to reserve for parries and dodges? And because instead of it being just like you get a move, you get a reaction, you get a bonus action, you get an action, I was like, well, let's just let people choose. And so, that was something that Zweihander was keyed up to do already. And I'm not familiar with the new edition of Pathfinder, but it's
oh,
interesting to hear that they did it as well. So this is second edition Pathfinder. Is that the idea?
yes, yes,
Oh, cool. Well, no, interesting. I mean, other than current things going on in the news with them, but like, yeah, I mean, I admire
yes, that
sort
also
of,
that.
sheesh. It's just like, yeah,
That's a very let's say complex topic to talk about these days.
yeah,
Things are
yes,
not
but
looking great there, but hopefully some
I don't,
accountability will
I
happen.
Yeah, I mean, like I work in video games, so who am I to speak? It's like the worst industry out there. But
Well,
the we just I'll have to try to do better. Is basically that takeaway.
that is true. That is true.
But with regards, so I'm not familiar with their new product, but it's interesting. I think AP is a really cool. It makes me feel like I have more choice.
Yes, it does.
When I'm sort of like, I also don't want to be spoken down to, I think, by a system anymore. I know some people are like, oh, it's analysis paralysis, the burden of choice, and this and that and the other thing, and I'm like middle aged. Like, come on, like I can handle a couple of numbers. Like you don't. Anyway, but we're gonna get into this like angry man screams at cloud territory if we
I,
carry
I
on down this path.
I must say that I love it because it adds so much to the game when you can choose so much in tactical thinking and what options do I have? As you said, will I go? Should I go all in? Should I reserve my defenses? Should I go all defensive and be my party's tank? Should I? There is so much there when you give the options to the players, and more options. My book are always good. Okay, so that's mostly about what I have to do to talk about systems. Before I move on about the Kickstarter and a few other things, we are getting close to the finish line here. But there is anything about the systems or the setting that you would like to highlight, or something that you particularly should would like to talk about?
Ooh, like we've covered so much today. I would like. I mean, I think that the better way to approach this is instead of me trying to sort of like, we've been working on this game for over 2 years, the core team, and some of us 7 days a week, because people have day jobs and just to pay the rent. I live in LA and the rent is real. So like like it's there's so much to love and there's so much I'm into. So it's like I think you should invite Joseph on the show and let him just wax on about theurgy. I'm so terribly excited for it. It's been a very strange process. Like I've set the intention for the entire game as its creator and like basically the creative director, but also handcrafting systems with these lead designers who have like poured their blood, sweat, and tears into it. I don't know. I love how we took Zweihander's traits and we sort of that they had already been doing with their bestiary, and I like our hybridization of it, and it's like inspired by Core Zweihander, and it's inspired by Kingdom Death Monster and Dark Souls and all the things. I
Yeah,
just I just think that like somehow we pulled it off. And but I think if you want to deep dive, you should talk to some of the other designers. Like
of
Joseph
course.
would be a great guy to talk to.
That's good to
I
know.
don't know.
And
I just hope people feel the love and the handcrafted effort that went into all of this.
that
Um, that's my hope.
oh, that's one thing I think the the love and the passion that the designers have for this game, it oozes out. It's very noticeable. I would not be doing this for any game. As I said, this is my first time doing an international interview, and to be fair, uh, a few games have made me so um, passionate as Wayhander have. So as I mean as Blackbirds have. I'm sorry.
No, no,
So
it's all the same family, so we appreciate it.
okay, so let's talk a little bit about some other stuff and go to the
Sure.
finish line. So, first of all, art. The art in this book is amazing. It's so good. I don't think I have seen any piece of art that I didn't like. The cover from the Raposa is just fantastic. Both of them are just fantastic. And then you have it's so good. So much stuff is so good. And there are so many different styles of art in this book, and they all seem to fit together somehow. And even things that most games would not devote that much attention to it, but I saw recently on Twitter the dice rolls comic book drawings, and that's so good to explain and make the system clear and give a visual aid for some systems that are maybe not immediately clear for someone who is not very familiar with RPGs. So how did you get such a stellar group of artists? And Um, can you talk a little bit about the art direction from the game because it's
Yeah, no, for
really
sure.
stunning.
It's so we have a number of art directors that did a really good job and worked very closely with me. First and foremost, we had Hannah Han work on the project, a very gifted illustrator local to LA. Um, Really just a very sort of talented, um, wonderful human. Mary Gumport came on later to be an AD because we needed a lot of procedural process stuff to happen, like people getting contracts and paid, and this is for a lot of us like this is our first rodeo doing it ourselves. Even though we're like, yeah, we were all ex White Wolf. I didn't work in accounting. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's a
Let's
lot
see.
to learn, and I feel like we're doing an okay job, but we'll do better next time too. And then Rob Sather, who I've already, sung the praises of, like, and then of course we have, Diane over at AMU, who's going to be doing our layouts, whose last name escapes me in this moment, but I will get it right in the future. But we've had a lot of art support, but specifically the intentions about the art. My background starts with physical art, painting, and sculpture. There was a brief moment where some very powerful people in the New York art community were like telling my mother to pull me out of public school and just have me sculpting. They're like, that's the rest of his life. Stop. And my mom was kind of like, I don't know if that's a good idea. This kid probably needs to know a little bit of algebra. And so it didn't go that path. So like the physical, tactile art has been an important thing in my life since I was a toddler. Um, and I also, it is art not only that sells these books, but expresses what they are, on the shelf and in our imagination. And I just wanted to get artists I admired working on the project. I didn't want to gouge the depths of Artist Alley and offer like the worst rates in the world, which I think happens all too often and results outside of like the Warhammer 40K stuff, which has like decades of amazing art from like people like Mark Gibbons and what have you. Like I was like that was the North Star. I was like that's the best of the best. Like if you're gonna do it right, like that was definitely a point of inspiration. And then also there are people who buy these books who don't have groups to play with, and I wanted them to like proudly be able to put Blackbirds either in the Servant of the Gods pack or in the standard edition like on their coffee table
I
and
will
not
be
be
doing
embarrassed.
that. I will send you a picture if you want to, but I will
Yeah,
be
no,
doing
I
that.
believe you. I believe you. Some people that's it. They buy it, they read the lore, they look at the books, art, and they're like, "This is wonderful," or they make characters, and then that's it for whatever reasons. And I wanted their experience to be like as rich as possible.
That's very interesting, because um, yeah, and I think you did a wonderful job. The art to this book is, and not only is it good,
There's a
but
bunch
it
of us. Yeah, thank you.
yeah, but and I should say not for the emperor. I agree. Not only not
I don't,
only
maybe I don't know. He's kind of a racist, the emperor, but
true, but that's fair enough. But uh,
I don't know what's the alternative. Blood for the blood god. I mean, there's no good answer there.
yeah, but for the greater good, they are not so great either. So uh,
That's the joke of that world, which is why I like it. The irony
yeah,
of 40k.
it's a satire that a lot of people don't get, and
It
it's
is
sad.
satire, and it's unfortunate that people are like, oh, yeah, but yes, Warhammer 40k is satire.
Yes, it is,
You heard it here
and a lot of
first.
people don't get it. But anyway, for God's sake, when you have phrases like "innocence proves nothing," you are not taking yourself seriously. Okay, but that's not a Warhammer 40k episode. This is about blackbirds. So
Sure, sure.
the art's great, and then it's not only great, and it's unusual. As you said, the 40k comparison is very interesting because you have a traditional sort of art in your book, yes, but you also have some things that are more impressionist. You have things that are more. Um, I don't know much about art. I'm not an art buff or something or anything, but it's not the typical art I see on most RPG books, and there is some of that there, but there are things that are very different, and I think the art is very evocative, especially of a sentiment. I think so much of the art that I have seen is melancholic, and that fits this word so well. And I have only compliments to make about the art. It's so good,
Well, that's
and
exciting.
yeah,
Thank you.
it's really good. So okay, then that's art, and then that's a topic very important for me, and I think for most people in this post-COVID I mean in this COVID world.
Yeah,
Um,
we're still in it. Yeah,
yeah,
I got to get my third shot. Get your shots if you
please do.
can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I got mine, and I'm very happy that I did when I did it. So but yeah, take your shots anyway. But one thing that is very important for us and most people, and especially modernly, RPGs have moved in many ways. They have occupied new spaces, not only the tabletop but also the virtual tabletops. And that's one thing I would like to ask, is that if you can talk about it, of course, because things may not be public knowledge, but if you can, is there any plans for official support or support of any kind for VGTs? Because, well, they are very important for playing RPGs these days.
So there's, I mean, goodness gracious. I mean, there's no shortage of hope and desire to do a great many things. Um, we can't really sort of talk about, any plans because,
Of
the
course.
future is unwritten. Um, Goodness, but like, I mean, I am certainly open to anything, and we'll see really what the hunger is from the community. And obviously, like, I don't know if you saw recently, like, our very quick pivot to creating a better, shipping package
Yes,
pledge
that.
level.
Yeah.
So, like, look, we're very committed and interested in doing whatever we can, especially when there's a cry for like something. But that's pretty much all I could say, really, at this point in time.
I see. I
I
understand.
mean, I would. I mean, my. If you saw my house, it's just miniatures and Dwarven Forge, and like, yes, I would love to do everything. But it's like, we'll see what the appetite is, and
I see.
honestly, if there's an appetite, y'all are dictating the pace with which we do anything. The power is absolutely out of my hands. It is up to the audience, and if there's a desire, you shall have it.
Okay,
In a lot
that's
of cases.
a very good answer, because you're telling me there is a chance. So I hope people.
There's a chance I will be the first dungeon master on Mars. There is a chance. No. Yeah.
So I really hope that you get the necessary support, because these days I play most of my games on VGTs, and when there is something like that, it's super useful. But
For sure.
I understand that it depends on a lot of factors, and not only the will of the creator, of course. And so
Yeah.
hopefully that will be a thing. And talking about that, you have touched some of that on this conversation, but plans for the future. I mean, the Kickstarter is a success. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The game is financed, and I hopefully it will get bigger and bigger. But um, so do you have any plans, or I think um, the desire is there to do more, to do supplements, to do campaigns or tapestries, as you call them. I particularly am a fan of published campaigns and or tapestries or stuff like that, because I have very little time to prepare my own games. I actually love running published stuff. And so, is that a thing that's on the table? A big, to use the Warhammer comparison, enemy within Blackbirds thing, some campaign or tapestry or thing. Is that on the cards?
Well, so, you know, AMU and Daniel, they like making big books. It's like their brand, right? And I like big books. And so, and I'm currently staying up all night for some reason, which isn't just to play Red Dead Redemption 2 online, but sometimes it is. So there's work being done on other things, and we would be remiss not to launch this product with some sort of tapestry support. Um, the scale of that, I won't get into.
Of course.
The intention to do big tapestries, 10-20 session intention, yeah, I mean the intention is there. The I've even broken a few storylines for them already.
Nice.
um so we just have to see what the will of the people is.
Of course.
And because everything costs money and trees have to be cut down and pulped and turned into paper, and it's like I feel like a passenger on this journey. One day, and it's not going to be today, I'll tell you the actual page count of the original Blackbirds manuscript, and you'll like spit your water on the screen. But like the will is there to support this, because I get it. Especially if you have a day job, you come home, you're like, I just want to run the ruins of Undermountain. I completely get it. We're not all Critical Role. We have different lives to lead, and we have different amounts of time. And also, if you're running, my game, I'll feel very important and special. But yeah, so we definitely want to support.
Okay, that's awesome to hear, and I hope I can get that on my hands and when it exists.
Look to the
And
east. Yeah,
on the fifth day of the
that's
uh,
right.
and then the Kickstarter, one of our closing topics, the Kickstarter. So we have a campaign that's on, and there will be links to that on the description of this video on YouTube, and then I think they are on chat. I will ask someone to post them on chat also. But the Kickstarter is going on. The game was funded, I think, in the first 24 hours, or maybe in the first few
First 30
hours.
minutes.
Holy, that's a lot. Um, and then it's growing, and it is a success in many ways. And then there have been changes since the beginning, especially changes that affect us, international fans. And I would like to talk a little bit about that because I was so happy when I saw the reduction in shipping costs for the Servant of the Gods edition. That was very helpful, and
Hmm.
also the cheap shipping friendly gamer group bundle, which comes with more bucks and a lower cost of shipping. That alone sold like that alone. When I talked about with some people, I'm pretty sure that I sold a little bit a few games with when I spread that information for to my friends because they were hoping for something like that, and um, dividing those costs among a gaming group really helps. So, can you tell us a little bit about first about the campaign, the success, and I imagine the craziness that that accompany such an endeavor, and also the how can I say how the feedback of the fans is being processed. Let's say how is this process going for you?
Well, so the first 30 minutes of the Kickstarter was sort of like a very surreal moment. And I think a lot of people would come on your show and they would just go, yippee, wonderful, great. And it is, but like I'm sort of the kind of artist who like, suffers with a certain amount of mental illness and depression where I'm just like I can't fathom what's happening, and I get divorced from the moment. And I'm just like, hey, that looks good, because I leave my body in a way, and I've had friends recently, like really wonderful friends, and in some cases it's embarrassing because like sometimes these people are like celebrities and they're like, you need to be in the moment, you need to like get you need to experience this, not let it pass you by. So it's been many things to me, right? Because
Imagine.
it's like this is as close as I'm going to get to giving birth to a baby, and so there's this weird like postpartum feelings, and there's I hope people love it, and I hope people challenge it but aren't hateful, like and just a terrific amount of anxiety, and then also like thankfulness. So it's a very it's a menagerie of feelings. It's so strange because I think, gamers very often were outsiders in our communities. I know now everyone wants to sell this attitude of like, gamers, we control the world. It's like, it's still not true. You walk into a Dodgers game, no one gives a shit about Dungeons and Dragons. You're still like, it's a, or you go to your local football pitch and you're like, I love Vampire the Masquerade. Like, you're gonna get slapped, And so it's just like, we're still sort of outsiders. And for me, even though I'm like this, middle-aged American, um, it's so surreal. So I'm doing my best to be present for the moment. I just don't want to disappoint anybody, and I think that and so some of that anxiety turns into work ethic and turns into the passion you're seeing on the page, and I wish it came from like this wellspring of positivity. Like, I went to a Montessori school, but I'm not. It comes from like fear and a desire to not disappoint my peers, which are like all of you, in a way, because we all love the same stuff. So yeah. So let's end it on a shit note. Let's do some therapy. And but
Do
yeah.
some
So
therapy, actually.
it's a complicated feeling. I'm 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 very thankful, and I'm also like still like fingers crossed. Like, let's see what happens. You know. Because in
Oh
some
yes,
ways it feels like an underdog story, right? Because
it
like we
is.
live
It
in this world,
absolutely is.
like, there's these 800-pound gorillas in the room, and I'm just like, I'd like to make a weird dark fantasy game. And, we'll see. It's up to y'all. But thank you for each and every one of you who spends a single dollar. And then with regards to the shipping, Daniel and I just powwowed and sat down and we're like, what do we do? Because the world is against us. Like this shipping crisis, like that's not us. And Brexit, that's not us. And so just like, the idea of like, well, crowdsourcing and GoFundMe and people just helping each other out. Can games are played with groups? Can a group just kind of get, together and mitigate the shipping issue? And so that's where that came from, was just looking at a gaming table and saying, there's like 5 people sitting there. Why aren't they working together? And so that was the impetus for that.
That's amazing. I really appreciate the thought, and not many. And I say that um, I'm very secure in saying that not many publishers would have that kind of care for international fans. Not everyone does. But I'm very happy that you do. So,
No, we're thankful for South America and Brazil and Europe, and like, I mean, dude, like, if you even look at the games that like Japan is playing,
oh yeah,
like like we're all storytellers. We all love myth. And I mean, not to get all, everyone knows about Joseph Campbell these days, but if you don't, look up Joseph Campbell and like, but it's just like, this is a human activity. We've been doing, like, that's why caves have like little horses on them, painted on them. It's like telling stories is like one of the oldest things that we've been doing together. And you know, yes, I'm an American by birth, but I that does not mean that that's the fan base that matters. We all matter, and I know about like your weird river woman myth that you got down there. The drowning like lover. Like, I'm like, these are my
oh
people.
yeah.
Like, like, we've got to reach them. And so anyway, so yeah, so the nationalistic attitude about consumption is really, I think, 100 years old and now not relevant to what we're doing.
And talking about things that are 100 years old, I would like to close on a more positive note, that's for sure. And that is, I saw an interview with you uh, some time ago. It is linked on the Kickstarter, that
Oh,
talks
okay.
about your diverse team, how your team is very diverse, and how that was um, a goal from the start, that you did not want only to have safety readers, you wanted to have people with diverse backgrounds working on your game. And then and I think that is a wonderful attitude to have, especially in age. And because for so long, a lot of, as you said, a lot of gaming spaces were dominated by a very particular kind of people, and seeing these doors being open more and more for more people is very good. And seeing things that I think really matter, that is giving those people space to produce and work on games, very important. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, like, I mean, it's an easy answer with a long reason, like everything. Um, put your money where your mouth is. Like,
True.
I live in Los Angeles, and it is like, the the fakest and well practiced at smiling, deeply caring, but also not at all. It's just like it's a cesspool. It's a prison planet. And I was like, well, I don't have a big Twitter following. Um, I'm like a cis white dude. Although it kind of makes me feel divorced from my Portuguese ancestry. But anyway, like, I was just like, all right, let's just do it. Let's just do the thing that needs to be done, and that's like, giving people a chance, and in some cases like working with people and improving their skill sets. Um, but on the other side of that, other than just do it, don't preach it. Um, I was like, I wanted to prove that horror fantasy and dark fantasy is liked by everybody. And so, like, I wanted to cut through the noise of it's just a misery simulator. It's just this, it's just that. Um, and that the only form of diverse, inclusive gaming is whatever a mega corporation called Hasbro is selling. Everyone likes to lose sight of that. I don't care. They're not gonna pay me to do anything. I don't like Transformers enough to worry about it. But like like we could just like get these voices in a room, ask them a couple questions. Do you like dark fantasy? If so, what? And then I got these answers. It's like I love Bloodborne, I love Dark Souls. It's like I love Berserk. I'm like okay, let's hug, and and
Yeah.
there's just like there was all this commonality, or someone's like I love Claymore. There's a lot of examples. It's like and I was like, okay, look at all this commonality between these diverse people. How do we tell horror fantasy? And I don't want to pull punches. And then we just talked and worked through it, and it was like, oh, I also want there to be like Moorish and Muslim undertones to Chrysius. We've got this amazing Palestinian writer and editor working with us. You're like, okay, it's like African mythology. Nobody uses it, and it's some of the coolest stuff out there. It's like I've got multiple Nigerian dudes working on this project. You know what I mean? Like it's just like
That's amazing.
let's just get in it, and that's it. It's not about, it's not a debate. It's not a T-shirt slogan. It's like that's where the pay stubs went. The end. So that was my approach, and then other people just got attracted to the project, friends of friends who wanted to take a stab at the opportunity. And if they did any amount of work that shipped in the book, they get a credit. And that's it. It was a pleasure to sort of, even challenge myself to work with so many diverse voices. So it's like, it's good for me too.
Yeah, yeah, and I can say, man, that does make a difference. I must say, I play Pathfinder with a trans woman, and when I talked about with her about this game, she was like, "Yeah, dark fantasy, really? They are most of the time dark fantasy, you know." And I was, I know, but this seems different. This seems interesting. Take a look. And she did, and she loved it. And now she is finding three friends to buy the book in the with the shipping friendly option.
Oh,
So
good, 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 good. But yeah, I mean, like, look,
that
man,
makes
I
a
love
difference
I,
for people.
it does, but also like, look, trans people have been with us like forever, right? Like even like in America, like the idea of like the twin soul concept, and like there's statues in the Louvre from the Roman like it's just like everyone grow up. Everyone grow up and deal with it.
True.
Gender's a spectrum, bro, and it's just like, yeah, I also, I don't get it. I've never understood. Well, I guess I understand, but it's a different conversation about the homogenization of fantasy, especially D&D and what happened in Lake Geneva in the 70s. But that's a whole different show. We can
True.
talk about it. But
Of course,
like
of course.
I think history is way more diverse and
Oh yeah,
wild and exciting than we have been led to
of course.
believe, at least
And
American history books.
and I must say, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you have a pregnant black woman on your cover, right?
Yes,
And
yes, we do.
and that. That alone sold the game to a few friends of mine who looked at that and said, "Wow, that's amazing." And I so
Well, she's not. So that's a woman by the name of Corvus Rook, or at least that's what she's going by these days. Um, she is on the cover because there is an intention to tell a very deep story with her later. So I don't want people to be confused. So she's there because she's very important to the lore of Blackbirds, but her story cannot be ham-fisted into the core book because we got to do a lot of heavy lifting there, and
fair
she
enough.
will be an important figure. There's some Easter eggs of her story in the book,
I'm looking forward
but
to see that.
that's like setting up the future.
Of course. And man, we have talked up for about 2 hours and a half,
Yeah, I'm
and
done with you. Well, this is I'm gonna leave your
damn.
keys on the shelf.
Uh, yeah, and it was a wonderful talk, really. I
Cool,
hope
man.
you had as much fun as I did, because this was a very interesting process and a very fun talk, and you are wonderful people to talk with. So, your game seems
You're gonna
amazing.
love Joseph. He's actually charming. So like, yeah, get ready.
And for the people watching, if you like this talk and if you liked the game and the things we talked about, give it a try, give it a look. It's on Kickstarter. The link is on the chat, and it will be in the description for you guys looking at this on YouTube. After I have a nightmare subtitling all of this for Portuguese, but I will do it.
My
uh,
grandmother Louise is cackling from the grave. She's so happy you have to do that.
Man, it's gonna be a lot of work, but it's gonna be worth it. So take a look at the Kickstarter, and they have shipping friendly options for us. And if even then it's too expensive for you, they have a PDF option that is great also. I think any way you can support the project if you like this, do it, because the game seems amazing. It's so cool, and I want more stretch goals for my rewards. So
Isn't that just, we just cut through the truth of it? Like we talk about politics and diversity, and it's like, yo, I want the damage degradation coins
yeah,
unlocked. That's what we got to in the end.
it's important to be true to yourself and to your followers. So,
All right. Okay.
okay, well, thanks, guys. Thanks a lot, Ryan. It was a pleasure, and hopefully we'll do this again or talking with some other designers in the future. And thank you guys from the chat for being staying with us for all this, and it was a pleasure. Will see you guys the next time. Bye.